Imagine sending your child off to school, believing they are safe, only to discover a dark truth hiding in plain sight. What would you do if someone you trusted turned out to be the very person causing harm? For the Bryant family, this nightmare became all too real when their daughter Sophia came home with a chilling revelation about her school bus driver. Lies, fear, and a hidden truth. This story will take you on a journey of courage, resilience, and the fight for justice. Stay with us as we uncover how one family stood up against the odds. You won't believe what happens next. But before we begin the story, let us know where you're watching from. And if today's story keeps you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit the subscribe button to enjoy more emotional and inspiring stories. Now let's start this journey together. The late summer sun cast a warm golden hue over the quiet suburban neighborhood of Oak Ridge Hills. A moving truck rumbled down the otherwise peaceful street, its tires crackling against the asphalt, as curious eyes peeked out from behind blinds and neatly trimmed hedges. The quiet hum of a lawnmower stopped abruptly. A jogger slowed his pace, casting a long look at the scene unfolding in front of a pale blue house at the corner of Maple Street. On the freshly cut lawn stood Angela Bryant, clutching her daughter Sophia's hand, while her husband Daniel lifted the last box from the truck. Angela took in their new surroundings. The perfectly manicured lawns, rows of identical houses painted in calming shades of beige, and the sheer stillness of the air. It was the kind of neighborhood people dreamed of raising children in, quiet, orderly, safe. But beneath the picture-perfect facade, Angela couldn't help but feel like a misplaced puzzle piece. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Angela asked Sophia, her voice soft with hope. Sophia, an energetic 9 years old with tightly coiled curls and wide, inquisitive eyes, glanced around. Her gaze landed on the massive oak tree in their front yard. "Can we put a tire swing on that tree, Mom?" she asked with a grin. Angela laughed, the tension in her shoulders easing just a little. "Maybe after we're settled in." "Looks like we're officially moved in," Daniel announced as he set down the box and wiped his brow. His smile was wide, infectious, as though determined to infect his wife and daughter with the optimism he so clearly carried. "How about pizza tonight? Moving champions deserve a feast." "Pizza," Sophia beamed, hopping excitedly on the lawn, her backpack bouncing on her shoulders. As they stepped into the house, their new home echoed with the emptiness of fresh beginnings. Boxes cluttered the living room, their contents waiting to be unpacked, but for now, Angela let herself bask in the hope they had chased all the way to Oak Ridge Hills. "We're doing this for Sophia," Daniel had said months ago when they made the decision to leave the city. "Better schools, safer streets. She deserves every chance we can give her." Angela had agreed, even though unease tugged at her heart. She was a designer who worked from home, and Daniel's job as a manager at a law firm kept him commuting to the city every day. It was a sacrifice they willingly made, believing that Oak Ridge Hills would give Sophia the best shot at a bright future. But now, as Angela glanced out the window at their new neighbors, she caught glimpses of suspicious eyes and half-hearted smiles. A woman watering her roses across the street paused for just a moment too long, her gaze lingering before she turned away. Two kids rode their bikes on the sidewalk, slowing as they passed the Bryant house before whispering something to each other. Angela felt it, a discomfort she couldn't quite name, but forced herself to look away. "First day of school tomorrow," Daniel called, interrupting her thoughts as he placed an empty pizza box on the counter. "Sophia, you ready to make new friends and show them how smart you are?" Sophia nodded enthusiastically, her eyes sparkling. "Do you think they'll like me?" Angela crouched in front of her daughter, smoothing down the edges of Sophia's backpack. "You're kind, you're smart, and you're brave. They'll see that, sweetheart." The next morning, the air was crisp, and a faint chill hinted at the changing seasons. Angela stood with Sophia at the end of their driveway, waiting for the school bus. Sophia clutched her new backpack tightly, her small fingers digging into the straps. The road was quiet, save for the distant rumble of a diesel engine. "Remember what we talked about?" Daniel said gently, crouching to meet Sophia at eye level. "Be yourself. Be kind. And if something doesn't feel right, Tell a teacher? Or us? Right away. Okay. Sophia nodded. Got it, Daddy. Angela smiled at her husband over Sophia's head. It was moments like this that reminded her they were a team, facing whatever came their way together. A sharp creak cut through the air as the bright yellow school bus rounded the corner, its large wheels grinding to a halt in front of them. The door swung open, and Sophia stared up at the man sitting behind the wheel. Mr. Baker, the bus driver, looked to be in his early 60s, his thinning gray hair neatly combed, and his face etched with deep lines that hinted at years of smiling or frowning. His expression was neutral as his eyes fell on Sophia. For a moment, Angela thought she caught a flicker of surprise on his face, but it vanished as quickly as it appeared. Morning, Mr. Baker said with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach his pale blue eyes. New to the route, huh? Yes, Angela replied, her tone polite. This is Sophia. She'll be riding with you from now on. Mr. Baker nodded, his gaze flickering briefly to Sophia before settling back on Angela. Well, hop on in. I'll take good care of her. There was nothing overtly wrong about his words or his demeanor, but something about him made Angela's stomach clench. She forced a smile as Sophia turned back to wave one last time before climbing the steps. As the bus doors groaned shut, Angela and Daniel stood hand in hand, watching as it disappeared down the street. She'll be fine, Daniel murmured, giving Angela's hand a gentle squeeze. Angela nodded, but the weight in her chest remained. A whisper of doubt lingered, a mother's instinct telling her that something felt off. She watched the bus fade into the distance, its bright yellow color contrasting sharply against the cold gray morning. Sophia, for her part, took a seat near the front, her heart fluttering with a mix of excitement and nerves. The other children on the bus seemed to stare a moment too long, their voices softening as they whispered among themselves. Sophia swallowed hard, turning her attention to the window. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Mr. Baker glancing at her in the rearview mirror. He smiled faintly, a smile that seemed more calculated than kind. Everything okay back there, Mr. Baker asked, his voice friendly enough, but with an edge Sophia couldn't quite place. Yes, sir, she replied softly, sinking deeper into her seat. As the bus continued on its route, Sophia stared out at the unfamiliar streets of Oak Ridge Hills, trying to ignore the uneasy feelings settling in her chest. For Angela, the house felt strangely quiet as she stood by the window, her coffee growing cold in her hands. The sense of unease she felt earlier had only deepened, even though she had no reason yet to doubt Mr. Baker. Still, a mother always knows. The morning sun bathed Oak Ridge Hills in a gentle glow as the familiar rumble of the yellow school bus echoed down Maple Street. Angela stood at the window, her arms crossed tightly over her chest as she sipped from her lukewarm coffee. She watched the bus disappear at the far end of the road, taking Sophia to her first day at school. A dull ache sat deep in her chest, equal parts pride and unease. Daniel broke the silence, entering the room with a satisfied grin. Well, our little girl is off to conquer the world. First day, first step. Angela glanced at him, her expression softening. Yeah, she'll do great. She wanted to believe it, but a mother's instinct rarely sat quietly. Sophia sat quietly in her assigned seat, clutching her brand-new notebook against her chest. The classroom buzzed with the sounds of children chatting and giggling, their laughter floating through the brightly colored walls. At the front of the room, Mrs. Porter, an older teacher with sharp glasses and a warm smile, began taking roll call. The day unfolded in small, nervous victories for Sophia. At recess, she met a girl named Ava, a friendly, red-haired girl with braces who invited Sophia to play on the swings. By lunchtime, Sophia sat at the edge of a crowded table, carefully unwrapping her peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Ava sat beside her, chattering away, while Sophia smiled and listened. But even with the kindness of new friends, there were moments when Sophia felt a spotlight shining on her. Whispers trailed behind her as she passed. She noticed a boy pointing her out to another classmate. Their stares lingered a beat too long. Sophia tried to brush it off, focusing instead on Ava's lighthearted jokes and the teacher's cheerful encouragement. By the time the school bell rang, Sophia was tired, her backpack feeling heavier than when she'd first stepped onto the bus that morning. As she lined up with the other children to board the bus, Mr. Baker's voice broke through her thoughts. "First day, huh, Miss Bryant?" Sophia froze at the sound of his voice. She turned, finding Mr. Baker's gaze fixed on her from the driver's seat. His smile was faint, like an afterthought, and his pale blue eyes seemed to see right through her. "Yes, sir," she replied quietly, clutching her backpack's straps tighter. "Hope you enjoyed it, Mr. Baker said, his voice low and even. Then, with a small nod, he added, "Time to head home." Sophia took her usual seat near the front as the other kids filed onto the bus, talking and laughing. But unlike this morning, Mr. Baker didn't glance at anyone else. He only glanced at Sophia, just once, through the rearview mirror. Sophia looked down at her shoes, suddenly eager for the ride to end. Angela nearly knocked over her coffee mug when she heard the bus approaching. She rushed to the door, opening it just as Sophia stepped down, her small figure bouncing under the weight of her backpack. Angela called, smiling as she knelt down to greet Sophia. "How was it? Tell me everything." Sophia gave a small, tired smile. "It was good, Mom. My teacher's nice, and I made a friend. Her name's Ava." Angela felt a wave of relief, brushing a stray curl from Sophia's forehead. "I'm so proud of you, baby. I knew you'd be amazing." Daniel appeared from the hallway, grinning broadly as Sophia ran inside. "Hey, champ. First day down, huh? That's my girl." Sophia gave him a small, tired thumbs up before plopping onto the couch with her backpack beside her. Angela began unpacking Sophia's lunchbox and saw her half-eaten sandwich. "You didn't eat much," she noted, her tone gentle. "I wasn't that hungry," Sophia said quietly, fiddling with her shoelace. Angela frowned but didn't push. Sophia looked worn out, and maybe that was all it was, first-day nerves. Dinner that evening was warm and familiar. Daniel teased Sophia about being the next class president, while Angela encouraged her to talk about the playground. Out of nowhere, Sophia's fork paused midair. "Our bus driver, he's kinda rude." Angela's smile faltered. "Rude? What do you mean, sweetie?" Sophia shrugged quickly, suddenly avoiding eye contact. "I don't know. He just says things." Daniel glanced up from his plate. "Like what?" Sophia pushed her food around and shook her head. "It's nothing. Can I be excused?" Angela exchanged a look with Daniel, her concern bubbling beneath the surface. "Are you sure, sweetheart? You can tell us if something's wrong." "It's fine, Mom," Sophia snapped, louder than she meant to. Her face fell, embarrassed by her outburst. Without another word, she slipped out of her chair and headed toward her room. The room fell into silence. "I'll talk to her later," Angela murmured, her voice low. "She's just tired." Daniel sighed, pushing his plate away. "Angela, she's adjusting. It's a new school, new place, new people. Give her some time." "It's not just that," Angela replied quietly, her brow furrowed. "It's the way she said it about the driver." Daniel shook his head. "You're reading into it. Not everyone who seems a little off is a problem. Let's not jump to conclusions, okay?" But Angela couldn't shake the unease coiling in her stomach. That night, after the house fell quiet, Angela peeked into Sophia's room. Her daughter was curled up in bed, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her brow furrowed even in sleep. Angela gently smoothed Sophia's hair and whispered, "You can always talk to me, baby." As she returned to her own bed, Daniel was already asleep, his steady breathing filling the room. Angela lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the words repeating in her mind. "Our bus driver, he's kinda rude." It was nothing concrete, but her instincts whispered otherwise. And as any mother knows, a whisper of unease can sometimes grow into a storm. The days in Oak Ridge Hills began to blur into a predictable routine. Each morning, the yellow school bus creaked to a stop at the corner of Maple Street. Sophia would climb aboard, clutching her backpack tightly, her shoulders slightly hunched. Each afternoon, she would return home, quieter than before. At first, Angela chalked it up to normal adjustment, new school, new friends, and the overwhelming task of fitting in. She reasoned that Sophia just needed time to settle into her new life. But as the weeks passed, small things started to catch Angela's attention. Little cracks in Sophia's usually cheerful demeanor became too glaring to ignore. It started subtly. One evening, Angela found Sophia sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a crumpled math worksheet. Her pencil was motionless in her hand, her face pale. "Hey, sweetheart," Angela said softly as she pulled out a chair beside her daughter. "You're usually done with homework by now. Need some help?" Sophia flinched slightly at her mother's voice, as though pulled out of deep thought. She blinked rapidly and offered a small, forced smile. "No, Mom. I'm just tired today." Angela frowned, brushing her fingers through Sophia's curls. "Are you sure you're okay? You've seemed quiet lately." Sophia nodded too quickly, her hands gripping her pencil. "I've been, Mom. Really?" Her words sounded rehearsed, as if she'd practiced saying them. Before Angela could ask anything more, Sophia scooped up her books and retreated to her room. Later that night, Angela lingered outside Sophia's door. She could hear the soft hum of her daughter's voice, faintly muttering something to herself. Pressing her ear closer, she caught only fragmented words. "Not my fault, don't look, don't talk." Angela's heart skipped. What was her daughter saying? Over the next week, Angela began noticing more changes. Sophia stopped talking about school altogether. The excited stories about her new friend Ava, about playground games and favorite lessons, had disappeared. When asked about her day, Sophia would shrug or mumble a one-word answer before disappearing into her room. Daniel, ever the optimist, brushed off Angela's concerns. "She's 8 years old, Angela. Kids go through phases. Maybe she's just tired of us asking the same questions every day." But Angela wasn't convinced. A mother knows when something is wrong, and with each passing day, Sophia seemed to shrink further into herself. One afternoon, as Sophia trudged off the bus, Angela noticed how her daughter's shoulders sagged under the weight of her backpack, as though the air itself pressed down on her. Her shoes scuffed against the pavement, her usual spring absent. "Sweetheart," Angela greeted with forced cheer. "How was your day?" Sophia didn't look up. "Fine," she murmured. Angela tried again as they walked inside. "Did you see Ava today? What did you two play at recess?" Sophia hesitated for a moment, her small fingers twisting nervously around the hem of her shirt. "Ava sat with some other girls today," she said quietly. "It's fine. I don't mind." Angela's heart twisted. "Honey, I'm sure." "I said it's fine, Mom," Sophia interrupted suddenly, her voice sharp. She dropped her backpack by the door and hurried upstairs without another word. Angela stood in the hallway, stunned. Her cheerful, vibrant little girl was slipping away, and she had no idea how to reach her. That evening, Angela shared her worries with Daniel as they sat together on the couch. "Something's wrong," Angela said firmly, her voice low to keep Sophia from hearing. "She's not herself. She's quiet, jumpy, and I keep catching her staring off into space like she's somewhere else." Daniel sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Angela, we've talked about this. Moving is hard on kids. She's still figuring things out. But it's more than that," Angela pressed. "It's the bus. I think something's happening there." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "The bus? You're basing this on what, exactly?" "She said the driver was rude," Angela said. "And now she won't talk about it. Every time I bring up school or the bus, she shuts down completely. And it's not just that. She's acting afraid of something." Daniel frowned. "You're overthinking this. Maybe the driver's just gruff, and she's sensitive to it. Sophia has always been a little shy." Angela shook her head. "No, it's not just shyness, Daniel. She's scared. I can see it." Daniel sighed again, clearly trying to end the conversation. "I'll tell you what, if it keeps up, I'll talk to the school. But let's not overreact and make her feel like something's wrong if there isn't." Angela wanted to argue, but she could see it was pointless tonight. Daniel had always been the calm one, the anchor that steadied her stormy instincts. But this time, Angela's instincts refused to be quiet. The following morning, Angela watched from the window as Sophia boarded the bus. Something about the way Sophia hesitated at the top step made Angela's stomach twist into knots. She caught a glimpse of Mr. Baker through the windshield. His expression was neutral, Nothing outwardly concerning. But there was something about the way his gaze lingered on Sophia as she passed that sent chills down Angela's spine. Sophia took her seat near the front, her small hands gripping the edge of the seat like a lifeline. From the house, Angela whispered to herself, "What's really going on here?" That afternoon, Angela was waiting when the bus arrived. Sophia stepped off slowly, her eyes fixed on the ground. Angela crouched in front of her, gently tucking a curl behind her daughter's ear. "Hey, baby. Rough day." Sophia didn't answer at first, but then she whispered something so faint that Angela almost missed it. "What was that, sweetheart?" Angela asked softly. Sophia's eyes darted toward the bus, which was now pulling away down the road. "He doesn't like me," she muttered. Angela blinked, startled. "Who doesn't like you?" Sophia hesitated before answering. "Mr. Baker." Angela felt her breath catch. "What do you mean, honey?" Sophia shook her head and pulled away, heading inside. "Never mind. It's nothing." But to Angela, it was everything. As the bus disappeared down the street, Angela's unease solidified into certainty. Something was happening. And whether Daniel believed her or not, she was going to get to the bottom of it. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting soft lines of light across the Bryant household. Angela sat at the kitchen table, absent-mindedly stirring her coffee as she watched Sophia prepare for school. Her daughter's movements were slow, deliberate, as if each step required extra effort. It wasn't the usual Sophia, cheerful, full of life, bouncing out the door with an infectious smile. Angela's gaze lingered on Sophia's small shoulders as she slipped on her backpack. "You ready, sweetheart?" Angela asked gently. Sophia nodded but didn't look up. "Yeah, Mom." Angela exchanged a quick glance with Daniel, who was fixing his tie by the hallway mirror. He looked back, wordlessly reassuring her in that way of his calm, steady. But Angela's instincts screamed louder than ever. She forced a smile for Sophia's sake and kissed her forehead as they waited for the bus. Moments later, the familiar rumble of the yellow school bus echoed through the quiet street. The doors creaked open, and Mr. Baker nodded stiffly from behind the wheel, his pale blue eyes as unreadable as always. Angela studied him carefully as Sophia hesitated at the steps before boarding. "Morning, Mr. Baker," Angela said with forced cheer, searching his face for any sign of something, anything, that might confirm her suspicions. "Morning, Mrs. Bryant," Mr. Baker replied curtly before shifting his focus to the road. As the doors hissed shut and the bus rolled away, Angela's heart thumped in her chest. Today would be different. Today, she wouldn't just let that uneasy feeling haunt her. Angela grabbed her car keys from the counter, kissed Daniel on the cheek, and whispered, "I'll be back soon." Angela's car crawled down the street, keeping a safe distance behind the bus. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel, trying to steady her nerves. "You're just watching, Angela. Nothing more. Just watching." The bus stopped at the first intersection, picking up a boy in a bright red jacket. Then another stop. Another child. Angela watched closely. Mr. Baker greeted each child with the same neutral expression. His posture remained stiff, his hand steady on the wheel. Nothing seemed out of place. Am I being paranoid? Angela thought, the doubt creeping in. As they wound through Oak Ridge Hills, Angela observed Sophia through the bus window. She sat quietly in her seat near the front, her hands resting in her lap. A few children behind her laughed and talked, their voices muffled through the glass. Sophia, however, remained silent. At the final stop, Angela parked her car a block away from the school and watched as the children disembarked. Mr. Baker helped a younger boy with his backpack before giving a faint, distant smile to a teacher waiting on the steps. Then Sophia stepped down. Angela noticed her hesitation, how she looked back at Mr. Baker quickly before scurrying off to join the crowd. It was subtle, but Angela saw it. Her stomach twisted. It wasn't nothing. On her way home, Angela spotted Rebecca Watson, the neighbor who lived 3 houses down. She was watering her garden, dressed in a crisp cardigan and slacks. Her perfectly manicured lawn a testament to Oak Ridge Hill's reputation for pristine appearances. Perfect chance, Angela thought, pulling her car into her driveway. She took a deep breath and approached Rebecca, forcing a friendly smile as she stepped onto the sidewalk. "Good morning, Rebecca," Angela called warmly. Rebecca looked up, her face immediately guarded. "Oh, hello, Angela. You're up and about early." "Yeah, just taking care of a few things." Angela hesitated before continuing, trying to keep her tone casual. "Hey, can I ask you something? It's about the school bus driver, Mr. Baker." Rebecca's hand paused midair, the water hose suddenly spraying wildly onto her tulips. "Mr. Baker?" she repeated. Her voice clipped. "Yeah, Sophia mentioned something odd about him. I just wanted to know if you or anyone else around here has had issues with him." Rebecca's smile faltered, replaced by something hard and unreadable. "Issues? With Mr. Baker?" She let out a sharp laugh, the sound startling Angela. "He's been driving the buses here for 20 years. Everyone loves him. He's part of the community." Angela frowned. "I'm not trying to accuse anyone, Rebecca. She hesitated, lowering her voice. "Sophia doesn't seem comfortable, that's all." Rebecca's expression darkened, her polite facade slipping further. "Maybe Sophia just needs to toughen up. Kids these days are too sensitive, always making something out of nothing." Angela's cheeks burned. "I'm just looking out for my daughter." "Well," Rebecca snapped, shutting off the hose with an angry twist, "maybe you should worry less about the bus driver and more about fitting in here. Some of us don't take kindly to stirring up trouble." Angela stared at Rebecca, stunned. The underlying meaning of her words hit like a slap to the face. "I'm sorry you feel that way," Angela said tightly, turning on her heel and walking back toward her house. Her heart pounded with anger and hurt. Angela sank into the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. Rebecca's words echoed in her mind, like poison taking root, stirring up trouble. What if I really am overreacting? She wondered, her confidence crumbling. Maybe Sophia was adjusting slowly. Maybe she was being too protective. But then Angela thought about the way Sophia hunched her shoulders when the bus approached, the way her face fell when she mentioned Mr. Baker, the whispers Angela had caught through Sophia's bedroom door. "No," Angela murmured to herself, shaking her head. "Something's wrong. I know it." She pulled out her phone and opened the calendar. Tomorrow, she would follow the bus again. And this time, she would be ready to look harder, to listen closer. Angela knew she couldn't afford to ignore her instincts any longer. For now, the house sat quiet, Daniel at work, Sophia still at school. But Angela's resolve burned brighter than ever. She would uncover the truth, no matter how much Rebecca or anyone else tried to dismiss her. After all, a mother's instinct wasn't something easily silenced. The afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent, casting golden light across Oak Ridge Hills. From the kitchen window, Angela glanced at the clock for the 10th time. 3:45 p.m. The bus was usually here by now. She wiped her hands on a kitchen towel, trying to calm herself. "It's fine," she whispered under her breath. "Traffic. That's all it is." But as the minutes ticked by, unease spread like a slow burn in her chest. She walked to the living room window, peering down the empty street. No yellow bus. No Sophia. By 4 o'clock, Angela's heart was racing. She grabbed her phone and dialed Daniel's number. He answered after the second ring, his voice steady and warm. "Hey, babe. What's up?" "Sophia's not home," Angela said quickly, trying to keep her voice calm. "The bus should have been here by now." Daniel paused on the other end, and Angela could hear the faint sounds of his office in the background. "Maybe the bus is running late," he said, though his tone betrayed his own worry. "Did you try calling the school?" "No," Angela replied, her hands trembling as she scrolled through her contacts. "I'll do it now. Call me back as soon as you hear something," Daniel said firmly. "I'm on my way home." Angela called the school office, tapping her foot anxiously against the tile floor as the phone rang. "Maplewood Elementary. This is Mrs. Gray," a cheerful voice answered. "Hi, this is Angela Bryant, Sophia Bryant's mother," Angela said, her voice shaking. "Sophia hasn't come home yet. The bus hasn't dropped her off. Is everything okay?" There was a pause on the other end. "Mrs. Bryant, all the buses completed their routes about 15 minutes ago," Mrs. Gray said, confusion in her voice. "Are you sure Sophia isn't home?" Angela's chest tightened. Yes, I'm sure. Can you check if she stayed late at school or something? Hold on one moment, please. The line went quiet, and Angela's stomach churned as she waited. Seconds dragged into an eternity before Mrs. Gray returned. I'm sorry, Mrs. Bryant, but Sophia's teacher confirmed she left on the bus as usual this afternoon. Angela felt like the floor had been ripped out from under her. Then where is she? She whispered. I don't know, Mrs. Gray replied sympathetically. Perhaps try calling her friend's parents? If she doesn't turn up soon, I recommend contacting the authorities. Angela hung up the phone, her pulse thundering in her ears. She paced the living room, wringing her hands, fighting back the rising wave of panic. By 4:30, she couldn't wait any longer. She grabbed her keys, ready to drive through the neighborhood herself. Just as she reached the door, Daniel burst in, his tie askew and his face etched with concern. Any word? He asked, scanning Angela's face. No. Angela choked, her voice breaking. The school said she got on the bus. Where is she, Daniel? Where's our daughter? Daniel pulled his phone from his pocket. I'm calling the police. No, Angela said quickly, grabbing his arm. Give me 15 minutes. I'll drive around first. If we don't find her by then, call them. Daniel hesitated, but nodded. His jaw clenched. I'm coming with you. The drive through Oak Ridge Hills felt like a nightmare. Daniel scanned every park, every street corner, while Angela called out Sophia's name through the open window. The golden afternoon light had faded to a dull gray, and the shadows stretched longer with every minute that passed. Where could she be? Angela whispered. Daniel's hands tightened on the wheel. We'll find her. We have to. At 5:15, they circled back to their street, empty-handed. Angela's phone buzzed in her lap. It was a neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, who lived down the block. Mrs. Bryant? Came the woman's hesitant voice. I just saw your daughter. She was walking down Maple Street a few minutes ago. Is everything all right? Angela gasped. She's where? Did she look okay? She looked upset, Mrs. Holloway replied softly. I didn't stop to ask. She seemed like she wanted to get home. Thank you, Angela said quickly. Hanging up. She's close, she told Daniel. Let's go home. As they pulled into the driveway, the sight of Sophia walking slowly down the sidewalk sent Angela scrambling out of the car. Sophia, she cried, running toward her daughter. Sophia flinched at her mother's voice. She looked small, disheveled, her braids messy and her yellow sweater smudged with dirt. Her face was pale, and her eyes, those bright, curious eyes, were red and puffy. Where have you been? Angela asked, her voice trembling as she knelt to Sophia's level. We've been so worried about you. Daniel caught up, his voice gentler, but no less urgent. Sophia, baby, what happened? Sophia's lower lip quivered as tears welled up in her eyes. She looked down at her shoes, unable to meet her parents' gaze. He made me get off the bus, she whispered. Angela froze. Who did? Sophia's shoulders shook as she began to sob. Mr. Baker. He stopped the bus, and he said I didn't belong there. He told me to get off. Daniel's face darkened, his fists clenching at his sides. You what? Sophia wiped her nose with the back of her hand, her voice breaking. He said people like me don't belong in his neighborhood, and if I told anyone, he'd make sure we'd have to leave. Angela felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. She pulled Sophia into her arms, holding her tightly, as tears rolled down her own cheeks. Oh, baby, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Daniel stood over them, his face a storm of rage and anguish. That's it, he said through gritted teeth. We're calling the police. Sophia's sobs grew louder. But what if he's right? What if nobody believes me? Angela cupped her daughter's face gently, forcing her to look up. Listen to me, Sophia. You did nothing wrong. Nothing. What he said was a lie. We believe you, and we'll make sure everyone else does too. Daniel's voice softened as he knelt beside them. You're brave for telling us, sweetheart. You don't need to be afraid anymore. Sophia nodded weakly, though tears still fell. As Daniel pulled out his phone to call the police, Angela held Sophia close, her heart breaking for her daughter. She knew this was only the beginning of the battle ahead. But one thing was certain, They would fight. No one would ever make Sophia feel small, unwelcome, or afraid again. Angela sat on the edge of the couch, her arm protectively wrapped around Sophia's trembling frame. The living room felt smaller now, the weight of everything Sophia had just revealed pressing in on them. Daniel paced near the window, his jaw set tight, and his fists clenched as though holding back a storm inside him. The distant hum of the night outside, the soft chirp of crickets, the occasional car passing by, felt deafening in the tense silence of the room. Finally, Daniel exhaled sharply, his voice low but firm. "I'm calling the police. Now!" Sophia stiffened in Angela's arms, her small hands gripping her mother's sweater. "No, Daddy. Please don't. He said no one would believe me. He said it'll just get worse." Daniel paused, spinning toward them, his face softening as he knelt in front of his daughter. "Sophia," he said gently, his voice no longer filled with rage, but with steady resolve, "listen to me. What Mr. Baker did, what he's been doing, is wrong. It's not your fault, and I don't care what he said. We believe you. We're going to fix this, but we have to tell the police so they can stop him." Sophia's eyes welled up again, her lip quivering. "What if he comes back? What if he tries to hurt us?" Angela stroked Sophia's hair, her voice soft but fierce. "He's not coming back. You're safe here, baby. Your dad, and I won't let anything happen to you." Sophia looked between her parents, tears trailing down her cheeks. Finally, she nodded weakly, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Okay." Daniel stood and dialed 911, his tone clipped and controlled as he spoke to the dispatcher. Angela watched him, her heart pounding as she held Sophia closer. Within 15 minutes, 2 police cars pulled up outside their house, red and blue lights flashing faintly against the quiet Oak Ridge Hill street. Angela glanced nervously at the window as 2 officers approached. One a tall, stocky white man with salt and pepper hair, and the other, a younger black woman whose badge glinted in the dim porch light. Daniel opened the door, stepping aside to let them in. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice steady but lined with tension. The older officer introduced himself. "I'm Officer Reynolds, and this is Officer Harris. We understand there's been an incident involving your daughter." "Yes," Daniel said, gesturing toward the couch. "Please come in. Our daughter Sophia. She has something to tell you." The officers entered, their expressions neutral but attentive as they sat across from Sophia, who clung to Angela's hand. Officer Harris, the younger of the 2, leaned forward slightly, her voice soft and kind. "Hi, Sophia," she said, offering a small smile. "I know this is really hard, but you're very brave for talking to us. Can you tell us what happened?" Sophia glanced at Angela, who nodded encouragingly, then looked back at Officer Harris. Her voice was small, but the words came steadily. "It started the first week of school. Mr. Baker, he's the bus driver. He didn't like me. I could tell. He wouldn't talk to me like he did with the other kids. He'd just look at me funny." Officer Harris nodded, jotting notes into her small notepad. "What do you mean by funny, sweetheart? Was he mean?" Sophia swallowed hard. "At first, he just said things under his breath when I got on the bus, like you people, or some folks don't know where they belong." Angela's grip tightened on Sophia's hand as her daughter continued. Daniel stood still by the window, his fists clenching and unclenching. Officer Reynolds frowned, his pen still against the paper. "Did he say anything directly to you, Sophia?" Sophia hesitated, her small shoulders trembling. "One day, he told me I shouldn't be on his bus. He said this wasn't a place for kids like me." And then her voice faltered, and she looked down, tears pooling in her eyes. "Last week, he stopped the bus early. He made me get off. He said I had to walk home because he didn't want me riding with the other kids." Angela's heart broke as Sophia sobbed quietly. "Baby, I'm so sorry," she whispered, hugging her close. Officer Harris's face hardened, though her voice remained calm. "Did he ever say that you couldn't tell anyone?" Sophia nodded, her voice shaking. "He said if I told, no one would believe me, and that he'd make sure we had to move away." Daniel turned abruptly, his voice rough with anger. "That man threatened my daughter and left her on the side of the road? Twice. How is he still driving that bus?" Officer Reynolds held up a hand, his tone placating. Mr. Bryant, I understand how upsetting this is, but I promise you, we're going to investigate this fully. We'll need to speak with Mr. Baker and the school district. If we can confirm these allegations, he will face consequences. Allegations? Daniel repeated, his voice rising. Are you saying you don't believe her? Of course we believe her. Officer Harris interjected quickly, giving her partner a sharp look. We just need to follow procedure. Sophia, you've been incredibly brave tonight. You've done the right thing by telling us. Angela looked down at Sophia, brushing a curl from her tear-streaked face. See, sweetheart? They're going to help us make sure he can't hurt anyone else. Sophia sniffled and nodded, her small hands still gripping Angela's tightly. After the officers left, Daniel slumped into the armchair, his hands covering his face. The weight of the night seemed to crash over him all at once. Angela sat beside Sophia, who had fallen into an exhausted sleep on the couch. I should have known, Daniel whispered, his voice hoarse. I should have seen it sooner. Angela shook her head gently. We're here now. That's what matters. We're going to protect her, Daniel, no matter what it takes. Daniel looked at Sophia, his face softening as he watched her sleep. He messed with the wrong family, he said quietly. We won't let him get away with this. Angela nodded, her resolve solidifying. She knew the days ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be questions, resistance, and disbelief from people like Rebecca and others who refused to see the truth. But Angela didn't care. She looked down at Sophia's peaceful face, determination blazing in her chest. This was just the beginning. The morning after Sophia's revelation, the Bryant household buzzed with a quiet tension that clung to every room. Sophia sat at the kitchen table, quietly picking at her cereal, her once bright eyes distant. Angela hovered nearby, watching her daughter carefully while Daniel paced in the living room, a cup of coffee forgotten in his hand. The doorbell rang suddenly, slicing through the silence. Angela flinched and hurried to answer it. Standing on the porch were Officers Reynolds and Harris, dressed in their Navy uniforms, notebooks in hand. The expressions on their faces were professional, but unreadable. Good morning, Mrs. Bryant, Officer Harris said gently. We wanted to update you on the investigation. Come, Angela said quickly, stepping aside. Please. Daniel joined them in the living room, his jaw tight and his eyes stormy. He wasted no time. Did you talk to him? Officer Reynolds cleared his throat as they sat down. We spoke with Mr. Baker this morning at his residence. And Daniel's voice was sharp, laced with anger. He denied everything, Officer Reynolds said flatly. Mr. Baker claims he's never mistreated Sophia or any child on his bus. He insists this is a misunderstanding. Angela's breath caught, disbelief flashing across her face. A misunderstanding? My daughter isn't making this up. Do you think she's lying? Not at all, Officer Harris said quickly, shooting her partner a look. We take Sophia's account very seriously, but we need concrete evidence before we can act. We'll be reviewing school bus security footage and talking to other students and parents. Angela frowned. Security footage? I thought there weren't any cameras on the buses. There aren't, Officer Harris admitted reluctantly, but we'll still investigate thoroughly. We also need to speak with Sophia's teacher and classmates to see if they've noticed anything unusual. That's not enough, Daniel said, his voice rising. You're treating him like he's innocent, like this is our burden to prove. My daughter was left on the side of the road twice. What more do you need? Officer Reynolds' expression remained impassive. Mr. Bryant, I understand how difficult this is, but we have procedures we need to follow. Until we find evidence or corroboration, Mr. Baker will remain on his route. The room fell into stunned silence. Angela felt as though the air had been sucked from her lungs. You're leaving him there? With other children? Again, we'll monitor the situation closely, Officer Harris said softly. If we find any credible evidence, Mr. Baker will be removed immediately. Unbelievable, Daniel muttered, shaking his head. Later that afternoon, Angela sat at her desk, staring blankly at her computer screen as her mind raced. Anger, frustration, and helplessness tangled inside her. What if they don't find evidence? What if no one believes us? Her phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from her neighbor, Rebecca Watson, the same Rebecca who had reacted so coldly days earlier. Saw the police at your house. Everything okay? Angela stared at the message, her hand tightening around the phone. Everything okay? It was more accusation than concern. People had started to notice the police visits, and rumors would spread soon enough. Daniel walked into the room, his voice low. The school called me. The district is aware of the situation, but they're waiting for the police to conclude their investigation before taking action. So they're ignoring it, Angela said bitterly. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. That's what it feels like. The next morning, Angela sat alone in her car outside Maplewood Elementary. Sophia had already gone inside, and Angela couldn't bring herself to drive home. Her thoughts swirled relentlessly, bouncing between anger and fear. A soft knock on her car window startled her. She turned to see a woman standing outside, a mother she vaguely recognized, wearing a beige coat and holding a toddler on her hip. Angela rolled down the window hesitantly. "Hi, can I help you?" The woman glanced around nervously before speaking. "You're Sophia's mom, right?" "Yes," Angela replied slowly. The woman shifted the toddler to her other hip and leaned closer. "My name's Janine Carter. I heard about what happened with the bus driver. I need to tell you something." Angela's pulse quickened. "What is it?" Janine lowered her voice, her eyes darting toward the school. "My son Marcus rode Mr. Baker's bus last year. He's in 3rd grade now. One afternoon, Marcus came home crying. He said Mr. Baker yelled at him for no reason, said he was taking up too much space and needed to sit in the back. At the time, I thought Marcus was exaggerating. But when he refused to get on the bus the next day, I knew something wasn't right." Angela stared at her, stunned. "Did you report it?" Janine shook her head, shame flickering across her face. "No. My husband said it wasn't worth it, said it wouldn't change anything. So I started driving Marcus to school instead." Angela exhaled slowly, her heart pounding. "Janine, you have to tell the police. They need to hear this." Janine looked hesitant, but then her gaze hardened with resolve. "You're right. I'll talk to them. If your Sophia is going through what my Marcus did, it has to stop." Angela nodded, tears prickling her eyes. "Thank you. Thank you so much." That evening, Angela and Daniel sat at the dining table, their voices low as they discussed the day's developments. "She's going to the police tomorrow," Angela said, relief finally breaking through her exhaustion. Janine's son experienced the same thing. "We're not alone in this." Daniel nodded, his expression thoughtful. "If one family speaks up, others might follow. There's no way he's only done this to Sophia." Angela reached across the table, squeezing Daniel's hand. "We're going to stop him, for Sophia and for every other child." The next day, Officer Harris stopped by the Bryan home with an update. "I wanted you to know," she said, her voice calm but firm. "Another parent has come forward with concerns about Mr. Baker. This strengthens our case." Angela felt a surge of hope, though she kept her tone measured. "Thank you. Please don't let this be ignored." "We won't," Officer Harris promised. "This isn't over." As the officer left, Angela turned to Daniel, who stood in the doorway watching the police car disappear. "This is it," Angela said quietly. "The truth is coming out." Daniel nodded, his expression steely. "And we're going to make sure everyone hears it." From her bedroom upstairs, Sophia watched her parents through the window, her small hands pressing against the glass. For the first time in weeks, she let out a shaky breath and whispered to herself, "They believe me." The day Mr. Baker was arrested was one Angela would never forget. It was early on a Thursday morning, the sun barely rising over Oak Ridge Hills, when 2 police cars quietly pulled up in front of Mr. Baker's modest beige house. Angela stood at her kitchen window, her breath catching as she watched from a distance. She had seen that house countless times on her way to drop off Sophia after pulling her from the bus route. Now, it felt as though a dark cloud was finally starting to lift. Daniel entered the kitchen, his tie still undone. "Is it happening?" he asked, his voice low. Angela nodded. "They're taking him in." Moments later, Mr. Baker appeared at his doorway. Even from across the street, Angela could see the confusion twisting his face, followed quickly by anger as Officer Harris and her team placed him in handcuffs. He shouted something unintelligible, his voice raw with indignation, as neighbors began peeking out from their windows and doorways. Angela stepped back from the window, her chest tight with a mix of relief and nerves. This is far from over, she thought, but it's a start. News of Mr. Baker's arrest spread like wildfire. Within hours, a local news van parked near the Bryant home, its crew lingering on the sidewalk, angling for interviews. By the following morning, school bus driver accused of abuse flashed across every local news station. Headlines like beloved community figure or hidden threat filled online forums and Facebook groups. Angela and Daniel chose to keep their curtains drawn, but the whispers of Oak Ridge Hills still found their way inside. Do you think it's true? I've known Mr. Baker for 20 years. He'd never do something like that. Those Bryants moved here not even a year ago, and look at the trouble they're stirring. But for every skeptical voice, there were others rising to support the Bryants. Parents like Janine Carter shared their stories publicly, emboldened by the courage of Sophia and her family. One mother came forward with a tearful account of how her daughter was once called dirty by Mr. Baker and told to sit at the back. Another parent admitted they'd been driving their son to school after similar incidents, but had been too scared to speak up. It wasn't just about Mr. Baker anymore. It was about a systemic failure that had allowed his behavior to go unchecked for years. When the trial date was set, the weight of it all fell heavily on the Bryant household. Sophia would have to testify. It wasn't a question of whether she could avoid it. Her voice had become the cornerstone of the case. "Are you sure you're ready for this, sweetheart?" Daniel asked Sophia one evening, sitting beside her on the couch. Sophia, now a little more confident than she'd been weeks before, nodded slowly. "I want to tell them what he did, so he can't hurt anyone else." Angela watched her daughter with pride and heartbreak. "You're so brave," she said softly, brushing Sophia's curls from her face. "We'll be right there with you." Still, the days leading up to the trial were long and restless. Angela spent countless nights unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling and running through every possible scenario. What if the jury didn't believe Sophia? What if Mr. Baker walked free? Daniel did his best to reassure her, but even he couldn't mask his worry. "We've come too far, Angela. The truth is on our side." The courthouse was cold and sterile, a far cry from the warmth of the Bryant home. Angela gripped Sophia's hand tightly as they walked into the courtroom. Rows of unfamiliar faces turned to look at them, some curious, others judgmental. Daniel walked beside them, his jaw set in determination. Mr. Baker sat at the defendant's table, dressed in a suit that didn't quite fit. His face was pale, but his eyes darted toward the Bryants with thinly veiled hostility. Angela met his stare head-on, refusing to flinch. When Sophia took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. Her small frame looked even smaller against the large wooden chair, but her voice, steady and clear, filled the space. "Can you tell us what happened?" the prosecutor asked gently. Sophia took a deep breath, glancing once at her parents before beginning. "Mr. Baker, he didn't like me. He would say things under his breath when I got on the bus, like, 'You don't belong here.'" The room remained silent as Sophia recounted the worst of it. "One day, he stopped the bus early and told me to get out. He said I shouldn't be riding with the other kids. I didn't know where I was, and I got really scared. I didn't tell anyone because he said no one would believe me." Angela wiped her tears quietly, her heart aching for her daughter. Sophia's voice trembled only once, but she pushed through, finishing with, "I just want him to stop. I want him to stop hurting kids like me." The defense attorney tried to challenge her testimony, but Sophia held her ground, her courage shining through every question. The trial lasted 3 days. Witness after witness stepped forward, Janine Carter, other parents. Even a former bus aide who admitted she'd left her job years ago because of Mr. Baker's behavior. When the jury finally returned with their verdict, the air in the courtroom felt thick enough to choke on. Guilty on all counts. Angela exhaled sharply, tears streaming down her face as she clutched Daniel's hand. Mr. Baker slumped in his seat, his face devoid of emotion as the judge read his sentence. Years in prison, stripped of his job and pension. Justice had been served. In the weeks that followed, Oak Ridge Hills was forced to confront its failures. The school district faced intense scrutiny for its lack of accountability and absence of security measures on buses. Policies were rewritten. Cameras were installed on every school bus. Bus drivers underwent rigorous screening and mandatory sensitivity training. At a special school board meeting, Angela stood before a room of parents, her voice clear and unwavering. "This isn't just about one man," she said. "This is about making sure no child feels unsafe on their way to school ever again. It's about standing up when something feels wrong. We didn't come here to stir up trouble. We came here to give our daughter a better life. And we won't stop until that's true for every child." One sunny afternoon, Angela watched Sophia climb into the new school bus, now driven by a kind woman who greeted each child with a warm smile. Sophia turned back and waved at her mother, a small smile playing on her lips. Angela waved back, her heart finally at peace. They had faced the storm and come out stronger. Justice wasn't just for Sophia. It was for every child who deserved to feel safe, valued, and protected. As the bus pulled away, Angela whispered to herself, "We did it, baby." And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to believe it. In the days following Mr. Baker's conviction, Oak Ridge Hills was a neighborhood in transition. The cracks that had long been hidden beneath its pristine surface were now impossible to ignore. Parents, teachers, and administrators could no longer look the other way. And although the road ahead wasn't smooth, something significant had shifted. Change was no longer just an idea. It was a necessity. Angela stood at the edge of Maplewood Elementary's gymnasium one evening, her eyes scanning the room, filled with folding chairs and concerned faces. A banner hung on the far wall that read, "Creating a safer, more inclusive community together." A man in a crisp gray suit stood at the podium, clearing his throat to settle the chatter of the audience. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he began. "As the superintendent of this district, I want to acknowledge the events of the past months and the pain caused, not only to the Bryant family, but to the trust we've broken with all our families. We are here to listen, to learn, and most importantly, to act." Angela squeezed Daniel's hand as they sat together in the second row. Sophia sat quietly beside her, playing with the strap of her backpack, but glancing up every now and then. The room wasn't hostile as it had once been. There were no skeptical whispers, no cold stares. Instead, parents and teachers alike sat with a collective determination on their faces, ready to confront what had been ignored for too long. Over the following weeks, the district implemented sweeping changes that were long overdue. Every yellow school bus in Oak Ridge Hills was equipped with security cameras, small, unassuming devices mounted near the driver's seat and along the aisles. The school board had approved funding in record time, driven by public pressure and media scrutiny. "It's not about mistrust," Superintendent Jenkins explained during a press conference. "It's about accountability. We owe it to our students and their families." Sophia watched with curiosity as Angela pointed out the cameras during her first ride back to school. The new bus driver, Mrs. Alvarez, greeted her with a kind smile as she climbed the steps. "Good morning, Sophia. You ready for another great day?" "Yes, ma'am," Sophia replied, her voice stronger than it had been in weeks. She smiled faintly as she took her seat, feeling a new sense of safety she hadn't known before. At school, cultural sensitivity training became a staple for staff. Teachers and administrators underwent mandatory workshops designed to address unconscious bias, systemic issues, and the importance of fostering an inclusive environment. Posters promoting diversity lined the halls, and classroom discussions encouraged open, respectful dialogue among students. Sophia's teacher, Mrs. Porter, invited community leaders to speak to the children about kindness, respect, and understanding others. One morning, Sophia raised her hand during a discussion about fairness. "I think it's important to tell people when something feels wrong," she said softly. "Even if you're scared, it's better to say it, because then it can get better." Mrs. Porter's smile was warm. "That's very wise, Sophia, and very brave." At home, Angela and Daniel found themselves increasingly involved in the efforts to keep the momentum of change alive. They were invited to join the district's newly formed Diversity and Inclusion Committee, a group composed of parents, teachers, and community leaders. Their first meeting was held in the school library, where parents sat in a circle, sharing stories and ideas. Daniel leaned forward, his voice calm but firm as he spoke. "It's not enough to fix what went wrong. We need to make sure this never happens again, not just for our kids, but for future families who move here. We need systems in place that protect everyone, regardless of who they are." Angela nodded in agreement. An anonymous reporting system for students and parents is a good start. People need a safe way to speak up without fear of being ignored, or worse, punished for it. Another parent, Mrs. Singh, added, "We should also work on building bridges between families here. Barriers like this form when people don't know each other. We need community events, spaces where people can connect and learn." For the first time in months, Angela felt hopeful. The room was filled with people who wanted real change. And for once, the momentum felt unstoppable. Not everyone in Oak Ridge Hills had been quick to embrace the changes. There were grumbles at first, comments about how things didn't used to be this complicated or that it's just one incident. No need to overhaul everything. But slowly, those voices began to fade. As the community witnessed the positive impact of the changes, even the skeptics began to soften. Parents who had once kept silent came forward to thank the Bryants for their courage. One afternoon, Angela was picking Sophia up from school when she spotted Rebecca Watson, the same neighbor who had dismissed her concerns months ago. Rebecca approached hesitantly, holding a small bouquet of flowers. "Hi, Angela," she said quietly. Angela paused, unsure how to respond. Rebecca looked down at the flowers, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I owe you an apology. I was wrong. About everything. I let my own assumptions cloud how I saw things. What happened to Sophia, it wasn't right. And you were brave to stand up for her." Angela took a deep breath, her shoulders softening. She reached out and accepted the flowers. "Thank you for saying that," she replied, her voice measured but kind. Rebecca nodded before turning and walking back toward her car. It wasn't a grand gesture, but it was a step in the right direction. Spring arrived in Oak Ridge Hills, bringing with it a renewed sense of hope. The community came together for a unity fair organized by the Diversity and Inclusion Committee. The school grounds were alive with music, food stalls, and laughter. Families mingled, children played, and barriers that had once seemed insurmountable began to crumble. Angela and Daniel stood under a tent handing out flyers about the committee's next initiatives. Sophia, now full of her old energy, ran across the grass with Ava, her first friend from school, their laughter carried by the warm breeze. "She looks happy," Daniel said, watching their daughter. "She is happy," Angela replied with a smile. "We all are." The Bryants had fought for their daughter, but in doing so, they had also helped transform a community. What had begun as a painful, isolating experience had sparked a movement for change, ensuring that no child would have to endure what Sophia had gone through. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Angela looked out over the fairgrounds and whispered to herself, "This is just the beginning." And she knew it to be true. The air felt crisp and fresh on the first day of the new school year. Sunlight streamed through the curtains of Sophia's bedroom as she tugged on her backpack. Standing taller than she had months before, she smiled at her reflection in the mirror, a quiet confidence radiating from her. "Ready for your big day, sweetheart?" Angela called from the hallway. "More than ready," Sophia chirped back, her voice carrying a joy that had been absent for too long. When she stepped into the kitchen, Daniel was waiting with a plate of her favorite pancakes. "Look at our brave girl," he said, pulling Sophia into a hug. "You've got this, champ." Sophia giggled. "I know, Daddy." Angela watched the exchange, her heart swelling with pride. The timid, withdrawn child who had once tiptoed through their house, afraid of shadows and whispers, was gone. Sophia's light had returned, brighter than ever. As the family stepped outside, the familiar sound of the school bus rumbled up the street. Sophia paused for a moment, her hand squeezing Angela's. "You okay?" Angela asked softly, kneeling to meet her daughter's gaze. Sophia nodded with determination. I'm okay, Mom. The bus pulled up, but this time there was no dread. The new driver, Mrs. Alvarez, smiled warmly from behind the wheel. Good morning, Sophia. Ready for a great year? Yes, ma'am, Sophia replied with a beaming smile. She climbed the steps, and instead of rushing to sit alone, she turned to wave at her parents. Through the windows, Angela could see Sophia surrounded by friends. Ava was there along with two new classmates, a girl named Sophia and a boy named Jordan. They were talking and laughing together, their different backgrounds blending like a bright mosaic of hope. She's thriving, Daniel said, his voice soft. Angela nodded, tears welling up in her eyes as the bus rolled away. She's free, she whispered. That afternoon, as Angela sat on the porch with a cup of tea, she found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. It felt surreal to think about how far they had come, from the uncertainty of moving to Oak Ridge Hills to the harrowing days of fear, doubt, and anger. There had been moments when giving up felt easier, when the weight of skepticism and hostility from their community threatened to bury them. But they hadn't backed down. They'd stood up for Sophia, and for every child who had ever been made to feel small, unwanted, or afraid. Angela glanced down at a news clipping tucked into her journal. It was from a recent article titled, How One Family Inspired a Movement for Change. Beneath the headline was a photo of Sophia, smiling proudly beside her parents at the Unity Fair. The article wasn't just about Mr. Baker's conviction. It was about the systemic changes that followed, the new safety measures, the cultural sensitivity training, and the anonymous reporting system that now gave children and families a voice. But as Angela had told the reporter who wrote the story, it wasn't about one man or one family. This was about choosing to stand up when it mattered most. It's about teaching our children and reminding ourselves that we don't have to accept what's wrong just because it's been ignored for so long. Oak Ridge Hills wasn't perfect. Angela knew that. There were still lingering tensions, still those who muttered about making a fuss over nothing. But those voices had grown quieter. The fair had brought neighbors together, bridging divides that had once seemed unbreakable. Mrs. Singh, from the Diversity Committee, was now working with the school to create a cultural awareness program, inviting families to share their stories and traditions. Rebecca Watson, once a source of scorn, now attended meetings regularly, openly acknowledging her past ignorance and her desire to learn. Change was happening, not overnight but steadily. And it wasn't just about the policies. It was about people. That evening, Sophia sat at the kitchen table, chattering animatedly about her first day. She described how she'd aced a math quiz, how Ava and Sophia had invited her to join their art club, and how Jordan had made the whole class laugh during recess. Angela watched her, heart swelling with pride. It wasn't just that Sophia was happy again. It was that she was fearless. Mom, Sophia said suddenly, tilting her head thoughtfully, do you think what happened to me will stop happening to other kids? Angela smiled softly, setting down her fork. I think what you did, what we all did, made a difference. And the best part? You showed everyone what it means to be brave, to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Sophia's eyes lit up. So we changed things? We did, Daniel chimed in, his voice steady. And you helped lead the way, Sophia. You're stronger than you'll ever know. Sophia's smile widened. I think I want to help other kids one day, too. You already have, Angela said, reaching across the table to squeeze her hand. As Angela tucked Sophia into bed that night, she reflected on what this journey had truly taught her. The power of courage, the importance of speaking up, the necessity of standing together as a family, even when the world seemed to push back. Most of all, it had taught her that no matter how small the voice or how big the fight, change was always possible. Angela kissed Sophia's forehead. Good night, sweetheart. Good night, Mom. Sophia whispered sleepily. Thank you for believing me. Angela paused at the doorway, her heart full. Always. The next morning, Sophia climbed onto the bus again, waving to her parents as she laughed with her friends. The bus pulled away, sunlight streaming through the windows, lighting up the faces of children from all walks of life. Children who were safe, protected and seen, Angela and Daniel stood together on the porch, watching until the bus disappeared down the street. "Do you think this is the end of the fight?" Daniel asked quietly. Angela smiled faintly. "No, it's just the beginning. But now, we're ready for it." They turned and walked back inside, the house bright with morning light. The story of the Bryants was more than just one family's fight. It was a testament to the strength that lies in all of us. It was a reminder that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's as small as speaking up when something feels wrong. In a world often clouded by division and doubt, Sophia's story stands as a beacon of resilience and hope. It reminds us that change begins with a single step, a single voice, and the unwavering belief that doing the right thing is always worth it. And for those willing to stand, no fight is ever truly lost. Thank you so much for staying with us until the end of this story. If you found it meaningful and inspiring, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss more heartfelt stories like this. Your support means the world to us. See you in the next one.